We need to talk about a major decision just handed down by the U.S. Supreme Court, one that could significantly impact how the Fourth Amendment is interpreted when it comes to law enforcement use of force. The court issued a 9-arrow unanimous ruling in a case that centers on what constitutes an unconstitutional seizure, and whether excessive force by police falls under the protections of the Fourth Amendment. If you're a gun owner or simply someone concerned about civil liberties, this is a case you should be paying attention to. The case is called Barnes v. Felix, and while it doesn't involve a search warrant or traditional home invasion scenario, it directly tackles the issue of seizure through use of force and how courts are now required to analyze such encounters. There have been many incidents in recent years where gun owners or civilians lawfully carrying firearms have found themselves in tense confrontations with law enforcement, some of which have ended tragically. This ruling affects how those kinds of situations are interpreted legally going forward. This particular ruling was authored by Justice Elena Kagan, with additional concurring opinions written by Justice Brett Kavanaugh, joined by Justices Clarence Thomas, Amy Coney Barrett, and Samuel Alito. The unanimous nature of the ruling indicates just how serious and clear-cut the court found the constitutional issue. Now, here are the facts of the case. Officer Robert Felix Jr. pulled over a man named Ashton Barnes in connection with alleged unpaid toll violations. During the stop, Officer Felix instructed Barnes to step out of his vehicle. Barnes partially complied. He opened the door and made a motion suggesting he was about to get out, but suddenly decided to drive away instead. At that moment, Officer Felix quickly jumped onto the doorsill, the narrow ledge of the open car door, as the car began to move. Within 2 seconds, Felix fired 2 shots into the vehicle, striking Barnes. Barnes continued to drive briefly before the vehicle came to a stop. He was fatally wounded and later died from the gunshots. Roughly 5 seconds passed from the moment the car began moving to when it stopped, and it was within 2 seconds of stepping onto the car's ledge that Officer Felix opened fire. Following this incident, Barnes's mother filed a lawsuit against Officer Felix, arguing that her son's Fourth Amendment rights were violated by the use of excessive and unconstitutional force. The case was initially heard in district court, where the judge granted summary judgment in favor of Officer Felix. The court relied on a legal doctrine used by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals known as the moment of threat rule. According to this rule, the only thing courts must consider is whether the officer felt endangered at the precise moment deadly force was used. Under this standard, everything that happened leading up to that moment, the commands given, the behavior of the individual, and the officer's decisions, are considered irrelevant. The Fifth Circuit upheld that decision on appeal, affirming that under the moment of threat doctrine, courts do not consider the lead-up to the use of force. They only assess the officer's perception of threat in that split second. But the Supreme Court had a very different view. At the heart of the case was a legal doctrine known as the moment of threat rule. Under this doctrine, the Fifth Circuit Court ruled that the only relevant time frame for evaluating whether Officer Felix's actions were lawful was the 2 seconds when he was holding onto the moving vehicle as Barnes tried to flee. The court concluded that since Officer Felix could have reasonably believed that his life was in danger during those 2 seconds, the use of deadly force was legally justified. That interpretation led the lower court to rule in the officer's favor. But when the case reached the U.S. Supreme Court, the justices were asked to decide a much broader and more impactful question. Should courts only evaluate the precise moment an officer perceives a threat? Or should they take into account the full sequence of events leading up to the incident when reviewing Fourth Amendment claims involving excessive force? In a unanimous 9-0 decision, the Supreme Court ruled that claims of excessive force by law enforcement during an arrest or stop must be analyzed under the Fourth Amendment, which requires that any use of force be objectively reasonable from the viewpoint of a reasonable officer on the scene. That reasonableness standard, the court emphasized, depends on the totality of the circumstances, not just what happened in a brief window of time. This means courts must consider everything that occurred during the encounter, including the events that happened before the officer used force. The court made it clear that assessing the use of deadly force requires a detailed and context-based review, not one that is narrowly focused on a single moment. In its written opinion, the court stated, "The totality of the circumstances inquiry has no time limit. While the moment of the shooting will often carry the most weight, Earlier events may shape how a reasonable officer interprets the situation, whether as dangerous or harmless. In other words, prior actions, interactions, and decisions, even before the officer perceived a threat, can change how that moment is legally understood. For example, if Barnes had been cooperative, or if the officer had choices that escalated the situation unnecessarily, those factors matter. The court rejected the idea that a judge can put on chronological blinders and look only at the final few seconds. According to the ruling, the moment of threat rule is too narrow and conflicts with the court's previous guidance requiring a broader fact-based analysis. Lower courts, the justices said, must not ignore important context, such as why the stop occurred, how the suspect behaved, and whether the officer's own actions helped create the dangerous situation. In its conclusion, the Supreme Court declined to resolve a related but separate issue: whether and how an officer's own role in escalating a situation should be weighed in determining if their use of force was reasonable. That question, they said, would have to be addressed in future cases. Now let's turn to the concurring opinions, which were written by Justice Kavanaugh, joined by Justices Thomas, Barrett, and Alito. The concurrences emphasized a critical concern: the extreme dangers law enforcement officers face during traffic stops. They pointed out that traffic stops are among the most volatile and unpredictable encounters for officers, often leading to injuries or even fatalities. In the case of Barnes, when he suddenly chose to flee, Officer Felix had very few safe options in those split seconds. The concurring justices acknowledged the danger posed not only to the officer but to public safety as well, stressing that officers must make life-or-death decisions in high-pressure moments. While the court's majority focused on how all circumstances must be weighed in legal analysis, the concurrence reminded us of the practical challenges officers face every day, especially during roadside encounters that can quickly spiral out of control. The Supreme Court, in its ruling, clearly rejected the narrow moment of threat analysis that was previously used by the Fifth Circuit. Instead, the justices emphasized the importance of evaluating the totality of the circumstances, not just what happened in the few seconds before force was used, but also the events leading up to and surrounding the incident. They made it clear that courts must consider everything that unfolded, from the initial interaction through to the final moments, in order to make a fair and lawful judgment. This broader approach includes weighing factors such as officer safety, public safety, and the behavior of everyone involved over the course of the encounter. It's not enough to just freeze-frame the final 2 seconds. Context matters. This allows the courts to come to a more accurate and balanced conclusion when determining whether a Fourth Amendment violation has occurred due to excessive force. Now here's why this case is especially important. It affects all of us. The Fourth Amendment protects citizens from unreasonable searches and seizures, and that includes protection against excessive or unjustified force by law enforcement. For law-abiding gun owners, this ruling is particularly significant. In recent years, we've seen several high-profile cases where lawful gun owners were involved in confrontations with law enforcement, sometimes resulting in the use of deadly force. In some of these incidents, confusion or miscommunication led to tragic outcomes. We've also seen concerning actions by agencies like the ATF, where raids or enforcement efforts have sparked controversy, especially when citizens who were legally exercising their rights were treated as if they were criminals. In these kinds of situations, the Supreme Court's decision offers an important legal safeguard. By requiring a full review of the entire situation, not just the split second before shots are fired, courts now have a clearer standard for protecting individual rights. This broader review may help prevent law enforcement from unjustly using force and then justifying it by focusing only on a narrow slice of the incident. Put simply, this ruling means that if an officer overreacts or misjudges a law-abiding citizen, especially a lawful gun owner, courts are now instructed to consider the full picture, not just the end result. That's a powerful shift and a necessary one, especially in the current climate where these types of interactions are becoming more common and more scrutinized. I wanted to highlight this ruling because it's a landmark decision that reinforces constitutional protections and could have a meaningful impact on how future cases are handled in court. If you have any questions about this case or how it may apply to other situations, feel free to leave a comment below. I'll do my best to answer as thoroughly as I can. And if you found this video informative and want to help support the channel, the best thing you can do is subscribe. It helps us continue bringing you important updates like this. As always, thank you for watching and thank you for your ongoing support.